All right. So we're back for part three in 3D. No, really, there's no 3D to this. Uh, in this episode, we will talk about the last couple colonies and some problems that arise in those English colonies. And then we'll also mention a few French and Spanish explorers and colonies. All right, previously in the first two parts, we talked about most of the English colonies, how they formed, and so forth. So let's get to rock and rolling. Thank you for tuning in to Goldie Oldies. Oh, wait, no. This is English Colonies, Part 3. All right, the Carolinas. You might ask, why are you doing Carolinas? Well, because originally the Carolinas were one colony. In 1670, Charles II gave a large land grant to a group of Englishmen. And this comprised of North Carolina, South Carolina, and actually part of Georgia. It was a very large land grant. Um, they already owned plantations over in the West Indies. And so they wanted to start up plantations here. And the tobacco and stuff had been doing really well. They wanted to get in and cash in on a lot of that. So they shipped slaves from their West Indies plantations and indentured servants to Carolina to really start kicking in production in order to get into the plantation market here. So they grew tobacco and grew rice and actually became a fairly large producer of rice. Uh, but they became the largest producer of tar. So the Carolinas became a large producer of tars, hence the Carolina Tar Heels. So you see, we get a lot of our names throughout our country because of stuff that's happened in our history. So things tend to make a lot more sense if you know what went on. Well, in 1729, Parliament divided the two into North and South. Pennsylvania. Oh, wait, that's Transylvania. My bad. Um, Charles II gave land to William Penn. Uh, the king had actually owed money to William's father, and quite a large debt that he owed. And so the king, in order to pay off his debt, uh, gave a bunch of this land in the colonies to William Penn. Well, the king also had a secret agenda as well. He wanted to get rid of a lot of the Quakers, and William Penn was going to take a lot of these Quakers to this new colony. If you're like me, when you think Quakers, you think of the Quaker Oat guy. Um, so, but he didn't like the Quakers, and he wanted to get them out and get rid of a lot of this religious dissension inside of England. Um, the word Slovenia is a land of woods, and Pennsylvania had a lot of woods. So if you look, Pennsylvania is William Penn. It's Penn, Slovenia. It's Penn's land of woods. Um, all faiths were tolerated. This is another colony like Rhode Island that was very tolerant of all other faiths. They gave fair treatment to the Indians. They paid them for their land. They didn't treat them horribly. I mean, they didn't treat them the greatest either, but they didn't treat them as horribly as a bunch of the other colonies. They actually treated them quite good compared to a lot of the other colonies. Um, the capital was Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. You can see this little statue that's there in Philadelphia. And it also had a large ethnic diversity. Since it tolerated all faiths, this led to large ethnic diversity there. And a lot of people came into Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania was quite opening and welcoming. Delaware. The Duke of York gave this land to William Penn, and he started Delaware. Okay, so this area right here, and you can see here's Maryland, here's Jersey, here's Pennsylvania. All right, some problems arise. Um, the Pict War in 1636. This was the first major conflict between Puritans and Indians. Some white traders were killed, and they believe the Indians did it. There's a chance they did, but there's also quite a large chance that some other uh, white man or European killed him and, blamed the Indians. Because, you know, Indians didn't really have a say so, didn't understand a lot what was going on in the settler society. So it was easy to blame them. And so the settlers went to the Indians and demanded that these specific Indians be turned over for killing these white traders. The Indians were like, no, and you just came on our land demanding that we're going to turn over this, and I'm pretty sure the settlers were getting real hostile, and so the Indians killed them. Like, no, bam, you're going to blame us for killing you. We're going to kill a few of you. Well, the colonists asked for help from another group of Indians, um, and which was a kind of a rival tribe of this group of Indians, and so the Indians led the colonists to this Indian fort that had been built. And so they set fire to the fort and killed everybody in the fort. And this is men, women, children. And the Indians that had helped them were just appalled. They were like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Because the Indians thought that they were going to go there and challenge them, and there was going to be a fight. The braves would come out and would fight. The men would fight among each other and not slaughter hundreds of women and children and men who didn't even have a chance to fight. This appalled the Indians, and they saw how vicious these new people could truly be. King Philip's War in 1675 was the next real major conflict between Indians and the settlers. King Philip was the nickname for a Metacom Indian chief. This is something the colonists called him, was King Philip. Um, Puritans had killed 3 Indians who had killed another Indian who was an informant of the Puritans, and this Indian was from another tribe. So basically, this group of 3 Indians had come across this other Indian who was an informant to the Puritans and killed that Indian. And so the Puritans were upset that they had killed one of their informants, and so they killed these Indians. Well, this started a series of attacks and counterattacks between the Indians and the colonists. And it got a pretty large death toll in it. Puritans called in other Indian groups for help. And then would call on some groups who disagreed with these groups, some of the warring tribes, and ignited this huge Indian Civil War. By the time it was over, 70% of the Indian population in this area was destroyed. 10% of the settlers were killed. And it had destroyed 25 New England towns. So, I mean, there were a lot of repercussions from what had happened from 3 Indians killing another and then the Puritans killing those Indians. Huge repercussions from that. Bacon's Rebellion in 1776. Now, this wasn't really dealing with the Indians. This was, it was and it wasn't. Nathaniel Bacon, he was a planter, and he had a small piece of land, and he really got fed up that he didn't have a whole lot of good land, and that he had high taxes. And comparatively, just to throw in there, the taxes we pay today are extremely higher compared to what they thought were high taxes. 2-3%. They were thinking this is nuts and crazy. Whereas most of us are paying 10% or better. Um, And so he promised anybody who would follow and help him, he would lower their taxes and give them free land. You know, take it from the Indians and give them free land, and so they would have these lower taxes. And so he gathered quite a following, and they began marching across Virginia. They were killing Indians. You know, no matter if they were friendly Indians or hostile Indians, they killed them all. If they saw an Indian, they were killing them. And they got to Jamestown. They burned Jamestown and then captured it and kept control of it. Well, England got word of what was going on. And England said, I don't think so, Tim. So they sent several warships full of soldiers. And they put an end to it pretty quick. You know, a lot of these colonists weren't prepared to battle trained professional soldiers. And the House of Burgess learned a really good lesson here, not to ignore the frontiersmen and the small farmers because things like this could happen. Um, and so they lowered the taxes and made some treaties with the Indians in order to get more land. The Glorious Revolution. So in 1685 is when it happened. We got to do a little backdating. 1651, the Navigation Acts were passed, and this basically said that colonists could only buy manufactured goods from England and sell the raw materials to England. You know, England made a lot of profit all of this. They would, you know, buy up real cheap all these manufactured goods. Now, if they sold them to somebody else, they could get a lot more money, but by law, they could only sell them to England. And England would have high prices on their manufactured good, and by law they had to buy from England. And so this just upset the settlers a lot. So in 1685, the Duke of York, James II, becomes king. And he wants to reign in the colonies. He's tired of all these problems that are happening. You know, we've had some rebellions, we've had several issues, you know. So he's going to rein it in, and he creates one large colony so he can control it. And this is called the Dominion of New England. Uh, which basically is all of New England, plus New York, New Jersey, that whole area. And he replaces all the people in charge and all the people with authority with people he can trust from England. Okay, he puts over them a military governor. He creates courts that have no juries. He takes the town meetings that they have and reduces to they can only have one per year. And James II believed in divine right, that he had the right to rule by God. And he ignored the things that Parliament had to say. Well, William and Mary, and you may have heard of William and Mary College, Mary was James's daughter, wound up taking control of England without bloodshed because a lot of people that supported her in Parliament, and they supported William and Mary to take over. And so James winds up stepping down and fleeing for his life because he knew he'd been killed. Um, and then they write the English Bill of Rights in 1689, which is king's rule with the consent of Parliament, not by divine right, which is another big thing that influences our independence and our Constitution and so forth. A guy by the name of John Locke, and would have talked about him greatly in civics. He plays a great role in beginning to change people's minds and how they think by talking about natural rights, that people have the right to throw over a tyrant if they aren't meeting the needs of the people. And that's, you know, a great line in the Declaration of Independence, that when a government no longer meets the needs of the people, is the people's not only responsibility but their right, or not only their right but their responsibility to overthrow said government. Um, and so they wound up dissolving the Dominion of New England, and the colonies went back to being their own separate colonies. And you kind of see a map here of the Dominion of New England. All right, some French explorers and colonies. 1530, Jacques Cartier explored Canada. 1608, Samuel de Champlain, the Great Lakes and Quebec. 1672, Louis Jolliet and Jacques Marquette. They explored the Mississippi River. 1682, Rene Robert Cavelier de La Salle. That's a mouthful. He explored the Mississippi River all the way down to its mouth. These two, Jolliet and Marquette, had turned around about Arkansas because they were running into these vicious Indian tribes or hostile Indian tribes. And so when LaSalle discovered it, or to the mouth, he claimed the river and all the tributaries that fed into it and the land that fed into it for France and named it Louisiana after Louis the 14th. And that's why Louisiana was such a big thing because it was all of the land that drained into Mississippi River. And then 1718, the port of New Orleans. The French mainly set up trading posts and forts. They didn't create all these villages and cities really that the English were creating. They set up these forts so they could trade with Indians and protect their territory and so forth. The French, out of all the people who came to settle in the Americas, intermingled more with the Indians. They set up very peaceful relations. They married. There was a lot of marriage between Indians and the French. And the French, were a lot more respectful of the Indians, and they coexisted in peace. And a lot of them were very interested in the furs, which were very popular over in Europe. The Spanish explorers and colonies, and uh, they started building forts throughout Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona in order to protect from the French because the French claimed all this Mississippi River. So, oh, well, we got to protect our spot. And so they start building these forts um, as far as over like San Antonio. Um, and they did the same thing in California whenever the British and Russian started coming in on the West Coast. And then their colonies in Florida had stretched to present day Louisiana, and that's why you'll hear some of them, the parishes in Louisiana, referred to as the Floridian parishes. All right, so until next time, deuces.